My brother falsely framed me and got me expelled from Stanford. My parents abandoned me, believing his lies. But 7 years later, I'm a millionaire and now they're begging. I got a restraining order and they'll never forget what I told them. I'm 26 years old. I work in real estate and I make more in 1/4 than my parents make in 2 years combined. And honestly, that's the only thing that gives me satisfaction when I think about them. 3 weeks ago, they showed up at my front door after 7 years of not talking to me, and the first thing my dad said was, "This house is smaller than I thought for someone who sells properties." Not a hello, not a how are you, just that. And there I was, standing like an idiot thinking, seriously? Is this really happening? I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was like 18 years old and had just received my acceptance letter to Stanford. I had worked like crazy throughout all of high school, had a perfect 4 gigapascals, had done a ton of extracurricular activities. I even won a state robotics competition. Like, I did everything right. I remember I opened the envelope in the kitchen and screamed. I got into Stanford, and my mom, Donna, barely looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, that's nice, Christopher," and kept texting. My dad, Michael, was watching the game and didn't turn around either. The thing is, my younger brother, Kevin, who was like 17 at the time, was applying to the same universities as me, and Stanford was his dream because my dad had studied there and all that legacy family thing. Kevin was always the golden child in my parents' eyes, you know? It didn't matter that his grades were mediocre, that he spent all his time playing video games instead of studying, that I literally had to help him with his basic math homework when he was a junior. None of that mattered because he was the youngest. He was charismatic. Everyone liked him. You know how that goes. I was the quiet nerd who spent all his time studying and building robots in the garage. When Kevin's rejection letter from Stanford arrived 2 weeks later, the house turned into a funeral. My mom cried for days. My dad called the admissions office like 5 times to complain, and Kevin looked at me with a hatred I had never seen before in my life. That's when the comments started. Kevin would tell anyone who would listen that I had cheated to get into Stanford, that it was impossible for someone as boring as me to have impressed the evaluators, that probably my school counselor had inflated my activities or something. My parents never contradicted him, not once. In fact, I remember one night at dinner, my dad said something like, "Well, Christopher has always been very dedicated to those things," with a tone that clearly insinuated that being dedicated was equivalent to being dishonest. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't say anything either because I was already used to being invisible in that house. I left for Stanford in August, and honestly, they were the best months of my life. I met Jake, my roommate, a super chill guy from Portland who studied computer science like me. We got along incredibly well. We spent entire nights programming. We organized Super Smash Bros tournaments on our dorm floor. It was great. My grades kept being excellent. I finished my first semester with a 3.9 gigapascals. I joined the university robotics club. Even a Google recruiter contacted me after a career fair. Life was perfect, or at least that's what I thought, as naive as I was. Back home, Kevin had ended up at the local state university, the same one he had gotten into at the last minute after Stanford rejected him. According to what my mom told me in one of the few times we talked on the phone, he wasn't doing well. He was failing like 3 classes in his first semester. But she said it like it was the professor's fault. Like Kevin is very smart, but the teachers don't know how to teach. That whole thing. I just said, and changed the subject because, frankly, I didn't care. What I didn't know is that Kevin was obsessed with me. Like literally obsessed. Jake showed me later that there were like 5 fake Instagram accounts following all my movements on social media, saving photos, comments, locations, everything. Second semester started calm. But in February, these weird Instagram accounts started appearing that looked like they were mine but weren't. They used my name, my photos that I had posted months before, and basically pretended to be me offering to sell study drugs to other Stanford students. Adderall, Ritalin, that kind of stuff. I didn't even find out until some guy in my algorithms class asked me if I still had Adderall available, and I was like, "What?" The guy showed me the Instagram messages, and I completely flipped out. I went straight to the university administration to report it, told them that someone was impersonating me, that I would never do something like that, and they said they would investigate it but not to worry because obviously it wasn't me. Except I should have worried, because what came next basically destroyed my life. It was March. I remember the date perfectly because it was the day before my mom's birthday, and I had bought a card to mail to her. Yes, I still did those things back then. What an idiot. I was in class when I got a text from the residence hall director telling me I needed to come back to my room immediately. I arrived, and there were 2 campus police officers and an administrator waiting for me outside my door. They told me they had received multiple reports that I was selling drugs and that they needed to search my room. I was in shock, like literally shaking, and I kept saying, "Search whatever you want because you're not going to find anything." Jake was there too, and he told them the same thing. Like, this guy doesn't even use alcohol, forget about drugs. But they searched anyway, and guess what they found? A bag with marijuana and unlabeled pills hidden in a shoebox at the back of my closet. I was paralyzed, couldn't even speak, because those things weren't mine. I had never seen that box in my life. I swore to them that someone had planted them there, that it was a setup, but they looked at me with that face of, "Yeah, sure, that's what everyone says." What came next was a bureaucratic nightmare that lasted 3 weeks. I was temporarily suspended from classes while they investigated. Turns out 3 different students had reported that I had sold them Adderall during the last month. And they all described the same process of contacting me on Instagram, meeting in the library, exchanging money for pills. I insisted it was impossible because I had never done that someone was framing me. But the university told me the testimonies were very specific and consistent. I begged them to drug test me, to check my bank records, to talk to anyone who knew me, but they said the process had to run its course. The disciplinary hearing was in April, and it was the most surreal and horrible thing I've ever experienced. There were like 6 people on the disciplinary panel sitting there with serious faces, and I basically had to defend myself alone because I couldn't afford a lawyer. My parents came, which surprised me, but they sat in the back with stone faces saying nothing. The 3 students who were accusing me weren't even present. They just sent written statements. Jake testified on my behalf, said we shared a room and that he had never seen me with drugs, that I spent all my time studying or in the robotics lab, that it was basically impossible that I was selling anything. A couple of professors also sent letters saying I was an exemplary student. But then they presented the fake Instagram accounts, the messages between those accounts and the students, and the physical descriptions that matched me. They presented the marijuana and pills they found in my room. And they presented something that made me feel like I had been kicked in the stomach. Text messages between one of the students accusing me and someone else coordinating when to plant the drugs in my room. Except the messages were edited in such a way that it seemed like I was the one who had coordinated hiding my own inventory there. The truth is, I don't remember much of that hearing after a certain point. I remember they were asking me questions and I was answering on autopilot, feeling completely disconnected from my body. I remember looking at my parents hoping they would say something, anything, that they would stand up and say, "Our son is not like this," but nothing. My mom was looking at her phone, and my dad was. And I found this out later. My dad was sending text messages to Kevin with live updates from the hearing. Yes, you read that right. While I was being expelled from university, my father was sending messages to my brother like it's going badly for him and stuff like that. I was expelled. The decision was unanimous. They said the evidence was overwhelming, that the university's policies on drugs were zero tolerance, and that my enrollment was terminated effective immediately. My academic transcripts would be withheld with a note, indicating expulsion for violation of controlled substance policies, which basically meant I couldn't transfer to any other decent university. 4 years of perfect work, my entire future, everything destroyed in a 2-hour hearing. I left there dazed. Jake was waiting for me outside and hugged me while I tried to process what had just happened. My parents had already left. They didn't even say goodbye. I got a text from my mom like an hour later that said, "You have 2 weeks to get your stuff out of the residence hall. Don't come home. We don't want a drug addict under our roof." That was it. No questions, no doubts, just instant condemnation. Kevin sent me a message too. It said something like, "I guess Stanford wasn't for you after all," with a shrugging emoji. At that moment, I didn't catch the full meaning of that message, but now I know it was basically a disguised confession. I had nowhere to go, so Jake offered to let me stay with him for the rest of the semester while I figured out what to do with my life. I spent those 2 weeks in a total fog, barely ate, barely slept, just spent my time searching for jobs online, knowing that without a college degree, my options were extremely limited. I applied to like 200 jobs without exaggerating. Most didn't even respond. The few that did rejected me after phone interviews where it was obvious I wasn't mentally well. Jake had an aunt in Portland who rented out a room. Well, technically it was a pantry converted into a room, and she offered it to me for $400 a month. I packed my things, got on a Greyhound bus because I didn't even have money for gas, and arrived in Portland with basically 2 suitcases and my laptop. The pantry room was exactly as depressing as it sounds. No windows, barely fit a twin bed. I could hear everything that happened in the house because the walls were thin as paper. But it was a roof and I couldn't complain. I got a job at Walmart stocking shelves on the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., making $11.50 an hour. During the day, I did DoorDash. When I had enough gas in the beat-up car I bought for $800 on Craigslist, a 2002 Honda Civic that sounded like it was going to explode every time I accelerated. On weekends, I worked at a kind of sketchy sports bar where the manager paid in cash and didn't ask many questions about documentation. I slept like 4 hours a day, lived on ramen and whatever was left over from DoorDash deliveries when customers didn't pick up their orders. The only thing that kept me sane was programming. There was a coffee shop diner called Dots, like 3 blocks from where I lived, and the owner, Linda, was a super kind lady who let me sit for hours with a single cup of coffee using her Wi-Fi. She knew I was in a difficult situation, I think, because she always brought me extra food like, "Oops, the cook made too much. Can you eat it so it doesn't go to waste?" God, Linda was an angel. I spent my time there writing code, learning new programming languages, building personal projects for my portfolio because I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could get a job in tech without the Stanford degree. I built a complete inventory management system as a personal project, super robust with a clean interface and everything. I put it on GitHub with detailed documentation. I did like 3 more projects of that style in the following months, working basically every free minute I had between my 3 jobs. I was exhausted all the time, had lost like 20 pounds because I wasn't eating well, probably looked like a zombie. But I couldn't stop because stopping meant thinking about how much I missed Stanford, about how unfair everything had been, about how my own family had abandoned me without even asking for my version of the story. One day, I was at Dots working on my laptop when a guy in a suit sat down at the table next to me. He was like in his 50s, gray hair, that vibe of successful but relaxed businessman. He asked me what I was doing and, normally I'm not one to talk to strangers, but I was so tired that honestly I just told him the truth. Like, I'm building an inventory system because I don't have anything better to do with my ruined life. He laughed and asked if he could see it. I showed it to him and he stared at my code for several minutes, asking pretty advanced technical questions. And I answered without problem because I knew what I was talking about. Turns out the guy's name was Mark, and he owned a medium-sized real estate company in Portland, like 40 agents working for him. He told me he was looking for someone to help him with his systems because they had everything in Excel and it was a complete mess. He offered me freelance work doing basic it, like $20 an hour, flexible with my schedule. I accepted without thinking twice. I started going to his office a couple of times a week, fixing computers, setting up networks, that kind of stuff. Mark realized quickly that I knew a lot more than he thought. He started asking me for more complex things. Automate his sales reports, create custom dashboards, integrate different systems. In like 3 months, I had built him a complete system that saved his team, probably 15 hours of manual work a week. When he offered me a full-time job as his IT person for $45,000 a year with benefits, I cried when he offered it to me. I'm not going to lie. I quit Walmart, quit DoorDash, quit the sketchy bar, and became a functional human again. I was like 21 at that point. Almost 2 years had passed since Stanford, and I finally felt like maybe my life wasn't completely destroyed. I moved to a real apartment, nothing fancy, but it had windows and a kitchen, and that felt like a palace compared to the pantry. I started eating better, sleeping normal hours. I even adopted a dog, a German Shepherd I named Pseudo, because I'm a nerd and I can't help it. Yes, my commands for the dog are literally Linux commands, like sudo sit or chmod 777 play. Jake says, I'm unbearable, but sudo doesn't mind. The weird thing is that while I was in my office fixing printers and configuring routers, I started learning about real estate almost by osmosis. I listened to the agents' calls, saw how they closed deals, understood pricing and marketing strategies. I realized that the real estate market is basically a game of data and timing, and I was good with data, very good. One day, one of the agents got sick right before an important showing, and Mark asked me if I could cover it because I knew the house he had configured the smart security system there. I went, showed the house to potential clients, and they made an offer that same night. Mark was impressed and told me, "You should consider getting your real estate license. I'll sponsor you." I said, "Why not?" Studied like crazy for 6 weeks while working, passed the exam on the first try, and suddenly I was a certified real estate agent. What differentiated me from other agents was my tech background. I built a website that used machine learning algorithms to predict market movements in different Portland neighborhoods. I started specializing in helping tech workers who were moving to Portland from San Francisco or Seattle, because I understood their language, knew what they were looking for. I could talk to them about internet latency and fiber optic coverage and that kind of stuff that traditional agents didn't understand. My first year as an agent, I made $88,200 in commissions. My second year, I made $145,000. My third year, I made $285,000. And this last quarter, I closed sales for $1.8 million. I'm not saying this to brag. Well, maybe a little. But mainly, I'm saying it because I need you to understand the contrast between where I am now and where I was 7 years ago. Sleeping in a pantry, eating ramen 3 times a day. During all this time, I heard nothing from my family. Zero contact, nothing. I changed my phone number like 2 years after moving to Portland and never gave it to them. I deleted all my social media and created new accounts with pseudonyms. I basically disappeared from their lives as much as they had disappeared from mine. Jake kept in contact with me. We talked often. He ended up at Google in Mountain View just as he had planned. Sometimes he would send me memes or weird news just to maintain the friendship, and I appreciated that more than he probably knew. And then, like 2 months ago, Jake sent me a long message out of nowhere. He said he had gone to a tech conference in Seattle and had run into my parents. Apparently, Kevin, my brother, had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. He had left a club in Vegas at 4 a.m., was driving drunk, crashed into a pole. He died instantly. He was like 26 years old, the same age I am now. I felt nothing when I read that. I tried to feel sadness or shock or something, but honestly, I just felt nothing. This guy had destroyed my life, had ruined my future, and now he was dead. Jake told me that when he ran into my parents at the conference, they asked him if he knew how to contact me. Jake gave them my information, which annoyed me a bit, but I also understood it was difficult for him to say no in that situation. He told me they looked devastated, that my mom had aged like 20 years, that my dad could barely maintain a coherent conversation. What Jake also told me, and this is important, is that he showed them something. Turns out Jake never deleted the backups from my Stanford laptop. When all the drama happened, he had saved evidence of everything. The original, unedited messages between the students and Kevin. Yes, it was Kevin who contacted them. The PayPal transactions where Kevin paid them $500 each to the 3 students to lie about me. The metadata from the fake Instagram accounts showing they were created from my parents' house IP when Kevin visited on vacation. Everything. Jake had told me at the time that he had saved all this, but I was so devastated that honestly I didn't pay attention to it. Jake showed all that evidence to my parents in a Starbucks in Seattle. He showed them how Kevin had planned everything meticulously, how he had used his knowledge of my room, because he had visited Stanford once, and I had shown him where I kept things, including that damn shoebox, to plant the drugs exactly where the campus police would find them. He showed them messages, where Kevin bragged to his friends about how he was going to ruin my life because I didn't deserve to be at Stanford, when he hadn't been accepted. According to Jake, my mom threw up. Literally. She got up and ran to the Starbucks bathroom and threw up. My dad stayed sitting staring at Jake's laptop with tears falling down his face and just kept repeating, "It can't be. It can't be." Jake told them that they had chosen to believe Kevin instead of believing me, that they had destroyed their relationship with their other son because they couldn't see beyond the favoritism they had always had. He told them I had built a successful life despite them, not thanks to them, and then he left. 3 weeks later, exactly 22 days ago, a Toyota Camry appeared in my driveway. I was in my home office, working on a presentation for a client, when Pseudo started barking like crazy. I looked out the window and saw two elderly people getting out of the car. It took me like 5 seconds to recognize them. It was my parents. My dad had gone completely gray, was thinner, walked hunched over. My mom had white hair, deep wrinkles, looked fragile. I hadn't seen them in 7 years and they looked like they had aged 20. I went downstairs with Pseudo following me, opened the door before they rang the bell because I didn't want them to wake up my neighbors with their drama. And there's my dad, looking at my house. A nice 3-bedroom house in a respectable neighborhood I bought last year. Thanks for asking. And the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, "This house is smaller than I thought for someone who sells properties." Not, "Hello, Christopher." Not, "Sorry for showing up without notice." Not, "We're so sorry." Just instant criticism. Some habits never die, I guess. My mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She said, "Christopher, we need to talk to you." And I said, "No, you don't. You decided you didn't want a drug addict under your roof 7 years ago, remember? There's nothing to talk about." My dad tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand and said, "You believed every word that came out of Kevin's mouth. You didn't even ask for my version. You didn't even doubt. You expelled me from your life, as quickly as Stanford expelled me from university." My mom started crying and said, "We didn't know Christopher, we thought." And I cut her off. "You thought what, Mom? You thought your perfect son with a 4 gigapascals suddenly became a drug dealer? Did that make sense in your heads? Or was it just easier to believe Kevin because it was always easier to be on his side?" My dad said, "Your brother was jealous. We didn't see it. It was a terrible mistake." And I laughed, a bitter laugh that came out of my throat without permission, and said, "A terrible mistake is confusing salt with sugar, not destroying your son's life." They told me they had found a diary of Kevin's after his death. Apparently, he had written the whole confession there, every step of his plan, why he did it, how he felt afterwards. He wrote that he regretted it, that he couldn't live with the guilt. That's why he started drinking so much and getting into dangerous situations. He basically insinuated that his death hadn't been as accidental as it seemed, though they didn't want to admit that. My mom handed me photocopies of some pages from the diary, as if that was going to change anything. I took them but didn't read them at that moment. Just threw them on the entryway table. My dad said they wanted to fix things, that they had lost one son and didn't want to lose the other two, that they understood, if I was angry, but hoped we could rebuild some kind of relationship. And I honestly didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at them, tell them all the pain I had suffered, the nights I spent crying in that pantry, the moments when I considered just disappearing because I didn't see the point of continuing. But another part of me was just tired, so deeply tired of all this. I told them to leave. My mom begged that we talk just 5 more minutes, that I give them a chance. I told them I didn't owe them anything, that they had 7 years to look for me if they really doubted Kevin's version, but they didn't. They only looked for me when he died, and they found undeniable evidence of his guilt. They didn't come because they doubted their judgment. They came because they finally knew the truth and can't live with the guilt. That's not real repentance. It's just wanting to feel better about themselves. They left crying. My mom kept saying, "Please, Christopher, please," from the car window while my dad drove. I closed the door, sat on my entryway floor, and Pseudo came and put his head in my lap. I stayed there like an hour, petting my dog, not crying but feeling like my chest was going to explode. That night, I did read the pages from Kevin's diary. It was disturbing. Honestly, he described everything in such detail, as if he was proud of what he had done. He talked about how he had researched Stanford's drug policies, how he had created the fake Instagram accounts using VPNs to hide his location, how he had manipulated those 3 students, convincing them that I was a real dealer and that he needed them to testify against me because I was trying to extort them. He had planned everything for months. Months. But then the last entries changed tone. He wrote about how he couldn't sleep, how my parents kept talking about me, occasionally wondering where I was, how he wondered if he had done the right thing. He wrote a long entry about seeing my LinkedIn profile, which I had created under my real name because I needed professional networking, and realizing I was succeeding in real estate. He said something like, his life was supposed to be ruined, not get better. It's not fair that he's happy when I'm miserable. It was sick, honestly. The last entry was from 2 days before his death. It just said, Christopher was always the son they needed, and I was always the son they wanted. But I ruined that for both of us, and I don't know how to fix it, and I think it's too late now. I can't say I felt sorry for him when I read that. Maybe I should. I don't know. But I didn't. My parents came back. 2 days later. I was on a Zoom call with an important client when they rang the doorbell insistently. I made signs at them through the window that I was busy, but they didn't leave. They kept ringing until I had to excuse myself from my client, cut the video, and open the door. I told them I was working, that they couldn't just show up whenever they wanted, that this was harassment. My mom said they just wanted me to know they weren't going to give up, that they were going to keep trying until I gave them a chance. I told them if they didn't leave, I was going to call the police. My dad said they were my parents, that I couldn't do that to them. And I said, watch me. I dialed 911 while they looked at me in disbelief. And when the operator answered, I said there were 2 people on my property who were refusing to leave after asking them multiple times to do so. My parents finally left before the police arrived, but I could see the pain and rage on their faces. My girlfriend, Nicole, we've been dating for like 8 months. She's a pediatric surgeon, and basically the most incredible person I've met, told me that maybe I should consider giving them a chance. She says people can change, that the pain of losing a child can transform people, that maybe they really do regret it. I told her I appreciate her perspective, but that she doesn't understand what it feels like to be completely abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. She respects my decision, but I notice it worries her that I'm carrying this anger with me. And maybe she's right. I don't know. Maybe I should forgive them, or at least listen to them completely. But every time I consider that possibility, I remember waking up in that pantry room in Portland with body aches from working 3 shifts in a row. I remember the humiliation of that hearing at Stanford. I remember the text from my mom saying, don't come home. And I just can't. I can't pretend that didn't happen. I can't act like their repentance, after finding Kevin's diary erases 7 years of total abandonment. I hired a lawyer last week to initiate a restraining order. Nicole doesn't agree with this decision, says it's too extreme. But I've already made my decision. I built a life without them. I have a house I love, a job I'm passionate about and that I'm very good at, a dog that responds to terminal commands, an incredible girlfriend who loves me despite all my emotional baggage. I have friends like Jake, who were there when I needed them most. I have a good life, a life I built from scratch after they threw me in the trash. My parents had 7 years to doubt, to investigate, to wonder if maybe they had been wrong about me. They didn't. They only looked for me when they had indisputable evidence that Kevin had lied. And honestly, I think that says everything I need to know about them. They didn't come because they missed me, or because they doubted their judgment. They came because their favorite son died, and suddenly they need to fill that void with the son they discarded. Last week, my dad sent me a long email. I didn't read all of it, just the first lines where he said he understood I was angry, but that they were also victims of Kevin, that he had deceived them as much as me. I deleted it. They're not victims, they're adults who made decisions, who chose to believe one son over the other, without even considering that maybe, just maybe, the son with the perfect track record was telling the truth. Pseudo is lying at my feet as I write this. 5 minutes ago I told him pseudo sit, and he sat immediately. I told him RM bis RF stress, and he started wagging his tail. Jake is right. I'm unbearable with my Linux commands. But Sudo doesn't judge. Nicole is coming tomorrow to stay for the weekend, and we're going to cook together. Maybe watch movies, do normal things that normal people do. Life is good. Not perfect. I still have days where the rage about Stanford eats me alive, but it's good. Should I forgive my parents? I don't know. That would probably be the emotionally mature and healthy answer. But the truth is, I don't want to. Not yet. Maybe never. And maybe that makes me a bad person, or vindictive, or emotionally immature. But it's my decision. After everything that happened, I finally have control over my own life, over who's in it, and who's not, and I've decided they're not. My brother destroyed my life because he was jealous. My parents allowed that destruction because it was easier to believe the worst of me than to accept they had raised someone capable of such betrayal. And now they want to come back because they finally face the consequences of their choices. But I'm not an emotional safety net. I'm not the consolation prize because their favorite son is dead. The restraining order gets approved next week. And after that, I'm going to keep living my life. Selling houses to tech workers, moving to Portland, programming in my free time, walking Sudo, loving Nicole. I'm going to keep being successful not to prove something to my parents, but because I like the person I became when I had to do everything alone. That person is strong, is capable, is resilient, and doesn't need their validation or their belated repentance. Maybe in 10 years I'll feel different. Maybe when I have my own kids I'll understand their perspective better. But for now, this is what it is. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who hurt you. It's something you do when you're ready. And I'm not ready. I may never be.